My name is Yara Whitfield, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy Special Operations, 12 years active duty, 3 classified deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, holder of top secret SCI clearance with specialized training in psychological operations and counterintelligence. My own father looked me straight in the eye during that court-martial and called me mentally unfit to inherit what my mother left behind. He didn't know I still had the classified Shadow Vesper files that would destroy not just him, but the entire network of corrupt officials who turned my special operations team into expendable assets. Judge Harrison Cole sat there nodding like a puppet, while my father painted me as an unstable veteran who couldn't handle the truth about Mission Silverfish. What they didn't realize was that I had been waiting 3 years for this exact moment to execute the most precise tactical operation of my military career. You tell me, in my position, would you have shown the same restraint, or would you have burned it all down the moment they betrayed your fallen brothers? The courtroom at Naval Station Norfolk felt colder than the Afghan mountains where I lost my entire team on that godforsaken night in March 2022. Rear Admiral Jonathan Whitfield, retired, sat at the plaintiff's table like he owned the place, which technically he was trying to do through this fabricated competency hearing. My mother's $2.3 million estate, her beachfront property in Virginia Beach, the trust fund she established for wounded veterans, everything she built while he was deployed for 8 months out of every year. His new wife, Patricia, 23 years younger with fake blonde hair and designer clothes that cost more than most sailors make in 6 months, whispered in his ear like she was running tactical communications during a live-fire exercise. The woman had moved into our family home exactly 60 days after my mother's funeral, bringing her own 2 teenage kids and demanding a fresh start that apparently required erasing every trace of the woman who built that life while he collected medals overseas. Judge Harrison Cole, a Navy Reserve captain who owed his civilian legal career to my father's connections at the Pentagon, reviewed the psychiatric evaluation like he was reading a routine weather report from Norfolk Weather Station. The defendant shows signs of severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, and what the doctors classify as command authority defiance disorder, he read in the monotone voice of someone following a predetermined script. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Command authority defiance disorder was what they called it when you refuse to abandon civilians to die in a fucking firefight. That's what they called it when you prioritize mission success over political convenience and personal career advancement. That's what they labeled you when you won't stay quiet about operations that violate every principle the Navy taught you to uphold during your commissioning ceremony. 3 psychiatrists, all handpicked by my father's high-powered legal team, all reaching the same convenient conclusion that I was too mentally unstable to manage my own inheritance or make rational decisions about my dead mother's final wishes. My military attorney, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, a JAG officer who looked like she'd rather be defending court-martial cases at Quantico than sitting in this Norfolk civilian courtroom, shuffled through her papers with the enthusiasm of someone following a lost cause that had been decided before she ever walked into the room. She'd been assigned to me through official channels, which meant someone higher up the chain of command had already decided the outcome of this hearing before the first witness was called. Your Honor, my client has served with distinction for over a decade, receiving commendations for valor in combat and leadership excellence during multiple deployments to active combat zones. She began with the mechanical precision of someone reading from a script. Cole cut her off with a wave of his hand that reminded me of dismissing junior officers during briefings. Counselor, we're not questioning Lieutenant Commander Whitfield's past service record, which we all respect and honor. We're determining her current mental capacity to handle significant financial responsibilities and complex decision-making in civilian society. The way he said it made my 12 years of special operations sound like ancient military history, completely irrelevant to the business of dividing up my dead mother's carefully planned legacy. Patricia leaned forward in her chair, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that somehow never seemed to get wet despite her theatrical performance, like she was auditioning for a daytime television drama about military families. Your Honor, I've witnessed Yara's violent outbursts firsthand during family gatherings, especially during the holidays when stress levels are naturally elevated, she said with practiced concern dripping from every word. Last Christmas, she threw a wine glass at the dining room wall when Jonathan mentioned her mother's extensive medical bills from the cancer treatment. That was a goddamn fabricated lie designed to make me look unstable. I had carefully set the glass down on the table and walked away when she started complaining about my mother's financially irresponsible decision to pursue experimental cancer treatment instead of just accepting hospice care. But Patricia knew exactly how to play the concerned stepmother role, complete with trembling voice and worried expressions that she'd probably practiced in front of her bathroom mirror for weeks. She'd choreographed this entire performance, perfecting every gesture and inflection that would convince a courtroom she actually gave a damn about anyone except herself and her rapidly expanding bank account. My father cleared his throat with the same authoritative sound he used to make during formal family dinners when he wanted everyone's undivided attention for one of his military leadership lectures. Your Honor, my daughter returned from her last deployment to Afghanistan as a fundamentally changed person, displaying symptoms that our military mental health professionals would classify as severe psychological trauma, he said with the measured cadence of someone delivering a briefing to senior officers. The incident during Operation Silverfish, which resulted in the loss of her entire 8-man special operations team, he paused deliberately, letting the weight of classified military operations hang in the air like smoke from a battlefield. She lost those men because she refused to follow direct orders from superior officers, prioritizing a village full of insurgent sympathizers over the safety of her own highly trained Navy SEALs. The courtroom went dead silent, as if someone had activated a sound suppression system during a classified briefing. That was the first time anyone had mentioned Silverfish in an official setting outside of classified debriefings, and he knew exactly what psychological warfare he was waging against me. He was using my most painful, classified failures as evidence of my mental instability, deliberately violating operational security protocols to win a civilian inheritance dispute that should never have involved classified military operations. Judge Cole's expression shifted to something between professional judicial concern and morbid curiosity about classified military operations that civilians never get to hear about firsthand. Admiral Whitfield, are you suggesting that classified military operations are directly relevant to the civil inheritance proceeding? He asked with the careful tone of someone who understands he's entering dangerous legal territory. My father nodded solemnly with the practiced gravitas of someone who'd spent 30 years briefing senators and defense contractors about sensitive military matters. Only insofar as they demonstrate a clear pattern of poor judgment and insubordination that continues to manifest in her civilian behavior today. My daughter's inability to accept responsibility for her tactical failures, her refusal to seek appropriate psychological treatment through Veterans Affairs medical programs, her increasingly hostile behavior toward family members who try to help her, all of this stems from unresolved combat trauma that she refuses to address through proper military medical channels. He was systematically painting me as a dangerous, unstable veteran who couldn't distinguish between active combat zones and peaceful civilian environments, a ticking psychological bomb that posed a threat to anyone who tried to help her transition back to normal society. I felt my hands automatically clench into the tight fists we practiced during hand-to-hand combat training, my body responding to threat assessment protocols even in this sterile civilian courtroom environment. This was the same man who taught me to field strip an M4 carbine when I was 8 years old, who drove me to junior ROTC meetings every Tuesday and Thursday during high school, who personally pinned my commission bars on my dress uniform during graduation ceremonies at the Naval Academy. Now, he was systematically using my classified service record as a precision weapon against me, twisting my most sensitive military missions into evidence of psychological illness and command authority problems. Patricia reached over and squeezed his shoulder in what was supposed to look like supportive spousal comfort, but I could clearly see the satisfied smirk she thought she was hiding behind her carefully applied makeup. She'd obviously coached him extensively on exactly what psychological buttons to push, probably spending weeks crafting this character assassination strategy designed to make me appear completely unfit to inherit my own mother's carefully planned legacy. The woman who never served a day in uniform was directing psychological operations against a decorated special operations veteran, and she thought she was winning. Lieutenant Commander Chen attempted to object to the introduction of classified material, but Cole was already leaning forward with the eager expression of someone who wanted to hear more salacious details about secret military operations. Given the sensitive nature of the information being discussed, I think it's appropriate for this court to hear Admiral Whitfield's concerns about his daughter's mental state in comprehensive detail, Cole announced with barely concealed excitement. My father stood up with the ramrod posture of someone addressing a fleet formation or briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff about critical national security matters. Your Honor, Operation Silverfish was supposed to be a routine, high-value target extraction mission based on solid intelligence from multiple confirmed sources. He began with the clinical detachment of someone reading from an after-action report. Intelligence assets indicated that a Taliban commander, responsible for coordinating IED attacks against coalition forces, was hiding in a specific village compound with minimal civilian presence. He looked directly at me with the same disappointed expression he'd worn when I told him I was choosing Navy Special Operations over a safe Air Force intelligence position. Instead of following her explicit orders to secure the target and neutralize resistance, my daughter chose to evacuate civilian non-combatants who may have been providing material support to enemy forces, directly compromising the mission objective and exposing her team to unnecessary tactical risks. The words hit me like precision sniper rounds targeting my most vulnerable psychological defenses, each accusation carefully calculated to inflict maximum emotional damage in front of witnesses. He was clinically describing the mission where I made the split-second decision to save 43 women and children from a building that military intelligence had assured us was occupied only by enemy combatants. The same mission where my team voluntarily held their defensive positions for 6 grueling hours while I coordinated with local tribal leaders to identify actual non-combatants versus potential threats. The same mission where we discovered that our supposed high-value target was actually a 12-year-old boy whose father had been killed by an American roadside bomb 2 months earlier, leaving him the sole caretaker for his extended family. But according to my father's carefully sanitized version of events, I was a rogue operator who had prioritized foreign civilian lives over American soldiers, violating basic military protocol and getting good men killed through emotional decision-making. He was rewriting history to serve his current legal strategy, transforming my most heroic moment into evidence of psychological instability and command failure. Patricia dabbed her eyes again with theatrical precision, this time adding a soft, calculated sob for enhanced dramatic effect that would play well to the civilian judge and court reporter. It breaks my heart to see what this combat trauma has done to our family dynamic, Your Honor, she said with practiced emotion that sounded like she'd rehearsed it during acting classes. Jonathan barely sleeps anymore, constantly worrying about what Yara might do next during one of her unpredictable episodes. Her voice cracked with manufactured pain as she continued her performance. She's made specific threats against us, Your Honor, making it abundantly clear that she blames us for her mother's death, even though we did absolutely everything humanly possible to get Elizabeth the best medical care available. Another carefully constricted lie designed to make me appear violent and irrational. I had never threatened anyone in my entire military or civilian life. I'd simply asked pointed questions about why my mother's cancer treatment was mysteriously delayed while Patricia was busy renovating the master bedroom with $50,000 worth of imported Italian marble. I had wondered aloud during one particularly tense family dinner why critical medical decisions were being postponed until after their 3-week honeymoon vacation in Europe while my mother was literally dying of stage 4 cancer. But according to my father's carefully sanitized version of events, I was a rogue operator who had prioritized foreign civilian lives over American soldiers, violating basic military protocol and getting good men killed through emotional decision-making. He was rewriting history to serve his current legal strategy, transforming my most heroic moment into evidence of psychological instability and command failure. Judge Cole leaned forward with the expression of someone who had obviously already made up his mind about the case outcome, but wanted to appear thorough and judicial for the court record. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield, do you have anything to say in response to these serious allegations about your mental state and potential for violence? He asked with the patronizing tone usually reserved for children or mental patients. This was the critical moment they had all been waiting for, the psychological trap they'd spent months setting with military precision. This was when they expected me to either explode in uncontrolled anger, proving their point about my mental instability, or collapse in defeated tears demonstrating that I was too emotionally fragile to handle complex financial responsibilities. They thought they had covered every possible angle, anticipated every potential response I could make without violating my sacred oath to protect classified information or compromising ongoing national security operations. They had crafted the perfect psychological pincer movement, attacking my military honor while hiding behind operational security protocols that prevented me from defending myself with the full truth. But what they didn't understand was that 3 years of careful planning and tactical patience were about to pay off in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. I stood up slowly, maintaining the perfect military bearing that had been drilled into me during 12 years of special operations training and countless high-stress combat situations. My voice came out calm and precisely controlled, exactly the way they had trained us for high-pressure tactical communications during active firefights with enemy forces. Your Honor, I have served my country with honor and distinction for 12 years, participating in classified operations that I cannot discuss in detail due to ongoing national security considerations. I began with the measured cadence of someone delivering a formal military briefing. I have never violated operational security protocols, never compromised classified information for personal gain, and never put my own interests above mission success or the safety of American personnel. I paused deliberately, looking directly at my father with the same steady gaze I'd perfected during countless standoffs with enemy combatants and hostile interrogators. However, since Admiral Whitfield has chosen to discuss highly classified military operations in this open civilian court, I believe the appropriate federal authorities should be immediately notified that operational security has been severely compromised. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as the implications of what I'd just said began to sink in for everyone present. My father's face went from his normal healthy tan to the pale gray color of someone experiencing acute cardiac distress as he suddenly realized he had just committed a serious federal crime in front of multiple witnesses. He had just violated the same sacred security protocols he'd spent 30 years of active duty scrupulously following, all in service of a civilian inheritance dispute that suddenly seemed trivial compared to potential federal charges. Judge Cole looked genuinely confused for the first time during the proceedings, like he was beginning to understand that this simple family inheritance dispute had somehow transformed into something much bigger and more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Patricia stopped her theatrical eye-dabbing performance and sat up straighter in her chair, her predatory instincts sensing that her carefully orchestrated legal strategy was about to go completely off script in ways she couldn't control. Lieutenant Commander Chen finally looked genuinely interested in the proceedings, probably recognizing that we had just shifted from routine civil law into serious military justice territory, where her JAG training might actually prove useful. The entire dynamic of the courtroom had changed in the space of 30 seconds, and I could see everyone scrambling to understand their new positions on this rapidly shifting tactical battlefield. I reached into my briefcase with deliberate, methodical movements and pulled out a single document folder sealed with multiple classification markings that made Judge Cole's eyes widen with something approaching panic. Your Honor, given that highly classified material has been inappropriately discussed in this proceeding, I believe it's not only appropriate, but legally mandatory to contact the proper federal oversight authorities immediately, I announced with the calm authority of someone who had just taken complete control of the tactical situation. I opened the folder just enough to display the header that was visible to everyone in the courtroom. Operation Shadow Vesper. Eyes only. Compartmented information. My father's face transitioned from gray to a sickly green color as he recognized exactly what Shadow Vesper represented, and he knew with absolute certainty that if those files were opened and examined in the civilian courtroom, it wouldn't just end his credibility or his comfortable retirement, it would end his freedom and possibly result in a life sentence in federal prison. The file represented 3 years of meticulous intelligence gathering, documenting systematic corruption that went far beyond one family's inheritance dispute. Patricia looked frantically between my father and the ominous document folder, like she was watching a tennis match played with live grenades, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak as genuine panic replaced her theatrical performance. "Jonathan, what is she talking about? What the hell is Shadow Vesper?" she demanded with rising hysteria, her voice cracking with the first real emotion she'd shown all day. My father couldn't answer her questions because doing so would require admitting that he had extensive knowledge about a classified intelligence operation that officially didn't exist, according to all public records. He couldn't explain to his trophy wife that Shadow Vesper was the code name for a sophisticated intelligence network that had been systematically feeding false information to special operations teams for more than 3 years, resulting in unnecessary American casualties. He couldn't tell Patricia that he had been a key participant in a conspiracy that deliberately got American soldiers killed for political convenience and personal financial profit, or that their lavish lifestyle was built on blood money extracted from defense contracts and intelligence manipulation. He was trapped by his own operational security protocols, unable to defend himself without incriminating himself even further in federal crimes that carried the death penalty. But I could see in their eyes that they still thought I was bluffing, that I wouldn't actually compromise genuine classified information just to win a civilian inheritance dispute that could be resolved through normal legal channels. Judge Cole cleared his throat nervously, sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the courtroom's efficient air conditioning system. "Lieutenant Commander, I don't think it's appropriate to introduce classified materials into a civil proceeding without proper federal authorization and security clearance verification," he said with the cautious tone of someone who suddenly realized he might be way out of his legal depth. He was essentially giving me a face-saving opportunity to back down, to put the folder away and accept their version of events without escalating the situation into federal territory. My father relaxed slightly in his chair, probably thinking I had reached the absolute limit of what I could legally do to defend myself without crossing lines that would destroy my own military career. Patricia's panic subsided somewhat as she interpreted the judge's words as an indication that her legal strategy might still be salvageable if I could be convinced to retreat from this dangerous path. That's when I spoke the 2 words that would change everything for everyone in that courtroom. Shadow Vesper. The effect was immediate and psychologically devastating to anyone who understood what those words represented in the intelligence community. My father's face went white as medical gauze, and his hands began trembling uncontrollably as if he was experiencing some kind of neurological episode. Patricia looked confused, but started to stand up from her chair like her survival instincts were telling her to flee the building immediately. Judge Cole froze with his gavel suspended halfway to the bench, apparently paralyzed by the realization that he had no idea how to handle whatever was about to happen next. Lieutenant Commander Chen's mouth fell open as she recognized that I had just activated some kind of classified protocol that wasn't covered in any of her JAG training manuals. But the most important reaction came from the back of the courtroom, where I had noticed a man in a plain dark suit quietly speaking into a secure communication device throughout the entire proceeding. He was federal surveillance, and he had been waiting for exactly this moment to execute predetermined protocols that had been established long before this inheritance hearing was ever scheduled. Within exactly 30 seconds of my speaking those two words, the courtroom doors opened with military precision, and 3 federal authorities walked in with the kind of purposeful efficiency that indicated this intervention had been carefully planned and rehearsed multiple times. Captain Rebecca Morrison from Naval Intelligence moved with the confident stride of someone who had just taken operational control of the entire situation. A civilian woman I didn't recognize was wearing a Justice Department badge and the kind of expensive suit that suggested she held significant authority within the federal law enforcement hierarchy. Commander Michael Torres from the Naval Inspector General's office carried himself with the bearing of someone who had conducted hundreds of these types of interventions and knew exactly how they would unfold. They weren't responding to my activation of Shadow Vesper protocol. They had been monitoring this proceeding from the beginning, waiting outside in a tactical command vehicle, ready to intervene the moment certain predetermined trigger words were spoken in connection with specific individuals under federal investigation. Captain Morrison approached the bench with the absolute authority of someone who had just assumed command of a military operation, her credentials and bearing immediately establishing her as the highest-ranking authority in the room. Your Honor, I'm Captain Rebecca Morrison, Naval Intelligence Command, and this proceeding has entered territory that requires immediate review and potential intervention by appropriate federal authorities, she announced with the crisp professionalism of someone delivering a briefing to the Secretary of Defense. She handed Judge Cole an official document that made him lean back in his chair like he had been physically struck by the implications of what he was reading. All parties present are hereby instructed to remain in place and comply with federal security protocols while we conduct a preliminary security assessment of information that may have been compromised during these proceedings. The document was clearly some kind of federal court order that transferred jurisdiction from civilian to military authority, and Judge Cole's expression suggested he understood that his comfortable local court had just become the center of a national security investigation with implications he couldn't begin to comprehend. My father tried desperately to maintain his military composure and bearing, but I could see his 3 decades of military training kicking in as automatic responses overrode his panic. When a captain from Naval Intelligence delivers direct orders in an official capacity, you comply immediately and ask questions later, regardless of your rank or retirement status. Patricia, however, had no such training or instinctive understanding of military protocol and authority structures. Excuse me, but this is a private civil court proceeding about a family inheritance matter, she protested with indignant anger, rising from her chair as if she intended to physically confront federal authorities. You people can't just barge in here and take over someone else's legal proceeding without proper warrants or jurisdiction. Commander Torres turned toward her with a look that could have sunk a destroyer at 20 miles, his expression conveying the kind of controlled menace that ended arguments before they could begin. Ma'am, when classified information is discussed in unauthorized settings by individuals who may be under federal investigation, it automatically becomes a matter of national security requiring immediate intervention. He explained with terrifying calm, "Please remain seated and comply with federal security protocols, or you will be physically restrained and charged with obstruction of a federal investigation." The Justice Department official approached my father with the kind of calm, professional demeanor that indicated very serious legal consequences were about to unfold for everyone involved in this conspiracy. "Admiral Whitfield, I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez, Department of Justice Criminal Investigation Division, and we need to discuss your recent statements regarding Operation Silverfish and your apparent detailed knowledge of classified protocols and intelligence operations," she said, while producing federal credentials that established her authority to investigate national security crimes. My father's carefully maintained military bearing finally cracked completely as he realized he was looking at someone who had the power to charge him with treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time, which was exactly what was happening as 30 years of careful reputation building evaporated in the space of a few minutes. His comfortable retirement, his prestigious position on various defense contractor boards, his influence in Washington political circles. All of it was about to disappear as federal investigators began examining every aspect of his post-military career. The man who had taught me about honor and duty was about to discover that federal prosecutors don't care about your previous service record when you've betrayed everything that service was supposed to represent. Judge Cole found his voice, though it emerged as more of a panicked squeak than the authoritative judicial tone he'd maintained throughout the hearing. "Captain Morrison, I'm not entirely sure I understand what's happening here or what authority you have to intervene in my courtroom," he said with the confused desperation of someone who realized he might be witnessing the end of his own judicial career. "This was supposed to be a simple competency hearing regarding a family inheritance dispute, nothing more complicated than determining financial guardianship." Captain Morrison nodded politely with the patience of someone who had explained federal jurisdiction to confused local officials hundreds of times throughout her career. "Your Honor, it was indeed a competency hearing when it began this morning. However, it has now become a national security investigation involving potential intelligence compromises, violation of classified protocols, and conspiracy to obstruct federal investigations." She gestured toward me with something that might have been professional respect. "Lieutenant Commander Whitfield has just activated a security protocol that indicates she possesses information regarding systematic intelligence compromises affecting special operations personnel, which requires immediate attention from authorities with appropriate security clearances and investigative jurisdiction." I remained standing at perfect military attention, maintaining the disciplined bearing that had been trained into me during countless high-stress situations, while watching my father's carefully constructed conspiracy systematically fall apart in real time like a controlled demolition. For 3 years, I had been patiently waiting for the right tactical moment to deploy Shadow Vesper and expose the network of corruption that had turned my special operations team into expendable assets for political and financial gain. For 3 years, I had been methodically gathering evidence, building unassailable cases, and preparing for the day when I could honor the promise I made to my dead teammates during those final moments in Afghanistan. This inheritance hearing had never been about my mental fitness or my ability to manage my mother's estate. It was a carefully orchestrated attempt to silence the only person who could definitively connect Operation Silverfish to the broader intelligence manipulation that had resulted in unnecessary American casualties across multiple theaters of operation. My father and his co-conspirators had walked directly into a trap that had been set with the same precision and patience that characterized the best special operations missions. Patricia finally began to understand that something was seriously and irreversibly wrong with her carefully planned scheme to acquire my mother's estate and secure her family's financial future. She grabbed my father's arm with desperate urgency and whispered with barely concealed panic, "Jonathan, what the hell is happening here? What is all this military stuff about? You said this would be simple." But my father couldn't provide answers because anything he said at this point would only dig the legal hole deeper and provide federal prosecutors with additional evidence of conspiracy and obstruction. He had already admitted to detailed knowledge of classified operations in open court, and he had already violated operational security protocols that he had sworn to protect throughout his military career. Now he was facing the very real possibility that everything he had done since retiring from active duty was about to be investigated by people who had the authority, resources, and motivation to put him in federal prison for the rest of his natural life. The comfortable post-military career he had built through defense contracting and political connections was about to be revealed as a sophisticated criminal enterprise built on betraying the very soldiers he had once commanded. Captain Morrison opened a secure tablet computer and began reading from what was obviously a carefully prepared script that had been written long before this courtroom confrontation took place. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield, your activation of Shadow Vesper Protocol indicates that you possess information regarding systematic intelligence compromises affecting special operations personnel deployed in classified theaters of operation, she said with the formal precision of someone conducting an official military briefing. Are you prepared to provide sworn testimony regarding these matters under the provisions of the Military Justice Code and federal whistleblower protection statutes? This was the moment I had been planning and preparing for since the day I carried my last teammate's body bag onto the transport plane at Bagram Airfield. This was the culmination of 3 years of investigation, evidence gathering, and tactical patience that had finally positioned me to honor the promise I made to 8 dead Navy SEALs. Affirmative, Captain, I replied with the crisp professionalism of someone accepting a critical mission assignment. I have extensive documentation regarding Operation Silverfish and related intelligence failures, including evidence of systematic manipulation designed to compromise special operations effectiveness for political and financial gain. Commander Torres stepped forward with a digital recording device and official forms that established the legal foundation for what was about to become federal testimony in a national security investigation. For the official record, this preliminary interview is being conducted under the authority of the Naval Inspector General's Office in conjunction with the Department of Justice Criminal Investigation Division, he announced while activating recording equipment that would capture every word spoken from this point forward. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield, do you swear that the testimony you are about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, and do you understand that providing false information to federal investigators constitutes a federal felony punishable by imprisonment? I raised my right hand with the same solemnity I had shown during my commissioning ceremony 12 years earlier. I do solemnly swear, sir. Patricia looked like she was about to faint from the stress of watching her comfortable lifestyle disappear in real time. My father looked like he was already mentally calculating potential prison sentences and wondering if his government pension would be revoked along with his security clearance and his freedom. My father cleared his throat with the same authoritative sound he used to make during formal family dinners when he wanted everyone's undivided attention for one of his military leadership lectures. Your Honor, my daughter returned from her last deployment to Afghanistan as a fundamentally changed person, displaying symptoms that our military mental health professionals would classify as severe psychological trauma. The incident during Operation Silverfish, which resulted in the loss of her entire 8-man special operations team, she lost those men because she refused to follow direct orders from superior officers, prioritizing a village full of insurgent sympathizers over the safety of her own highly trained Navy SEALs. The courtroom went dead silent, as if someone had activated a sound suppression system during a classified briefing. That was the first time anyone had mentioned Silverfish in an official setting outside of classified debriefings, and he knew exactly what psychological warfare he was waging against me. He was using my most painful classified failures as evidence of my mental instability, deliberately violating operational security protocols to win a civilian inheritance dispute that should never have involved classified military operations. Judge Cole's expression shifted to something between professional judicial concern and morbid curiosity about classified military operations that civilians never get to hear about firsthand. Admiral Whitfield, are you suggesting that classified military operations are directly relevant to this civil inheritance proceeding? He asked with the careful tone of someone who understands he's entering dangerous legal territory. My father nodded solemnly with the practiced gravitas of someone who'd spent 30 years briefing senators and defense contractors about sensitive military matters. Only insofar as they demonstrate a clear pattern of poor judgment and insubordination that continues to manifest in his civilian behavior today, he replied with clinical precision. My daughter's inability to accept responsibility for her tactical failures, her refusal to seek appropriate psychological treatment through Veterans Affairs medical programs, her increasingly hostile behavior toward family members who try to help her, all of this stems from unresolved combat trauma that she refuses to address through proper military medical channels. He was systematically painting me as a dangerous, unstable veteran who couldn't distinguish between active combat zones and peaceful civilian environments, a ticking, psychological time bomb that posed a threat to anyone who tried to help her transition back to normal society. I felt my hands automatically clench into the tight fists we practiced during hand-to-hand combat training, my body responding to threat assessment protocols even in the sterile civilian courtroom environment. This was the same man who taught me to field strip an M4 carbine when I was 8 years old, who drove me to junior ROTC meetings every Tuesday and Thursday during high school, who personally pinned my commission bars on my dress uniform during graduation ceremonies at the Naval Academy. Now he was systematically using my classified service record as a precision weapon against me, twisting my most sensitive military missions into evidence of psychological illness and command authority problems. Patricia reached over and squeezed his shoulder in what was supposed to look like supportive spousal comfort, but I could clearly see the satisfied smirk she thought she was hiding behind her carefully applied makeup. She'd obviously coached him extensively on exactly what psychological buttons to push, probably spending weeks crafting this character assassination strategy designed to make me appear completely unfit to inherit my own mother's carefully planned legacy. The woman who had never served a day in uniform was directing psychological operations against a decorated special operations veteran, and she thought she was winning. Special Agent Martinez positioned herself where she could carefully observe my father's facial expressions and body language, while I provided testimony that would determine whether he spent his remaining years in federal prison or military confinement. Lieutenant Commander, please describe the specific circumstances that led to your team's casualties during Operation Silverfish, including any irregularities in intelligence briefings or operational orders, she requested with the methodical approach of someone who had conducted thousands of these types of investigations. I took a deep breath and began delivering the testimony I had been mentally rehearsing for 3 years. Every detail verified and documented, every claim supported by evidence that federal prosecutors could use in court. On 15 March 2022, at approximately 0330 hours local time, my 8-man Special Operations team received final intelligence briefings for a high-value target extraction mission at grid coordinates 34.5691 degrees north, 69.2072 degrees east, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of Kandahar. I began with the clinical precision of an official after-action report. The intelligence package identified our target as Taliban commander Abdul Rahman Zakim, allegedly responsible for coordinating IED attacks against coalition forces and civilian infrastructure. My father's hand started trembling more violently as he recognized the specific details I was reciting, details that proved I had access to classified information that could destroy everyone involved in the conspiracy. I continued with the methodical delivery of facts that would form the foundation of federal prosecutions against multiple high-ranking military and civilian officials. Upon arrival at the target location, my team immediately discovered that the intelligence provided during our briefing was not only inaccurate, but appeared to have been deliberately falsified to maximize civilian casualties. I testified, while maintaining direct eye contact with my father. The compound contained 43 civilian noncombatants, primarily women and children under the age of 16, plus one elderly man who was bedridden with terminal cancer. I paused to let the implications sink in for everyone listening. The so-called high-value target was identified as a 12-year-old boy named Ahmed Hassan, whose father had been killed by an American drone strike 2 months earlier, and who was serving as the primary caretaker for his extended family of refugees. Patricia kept looking frantically between my father and me, like she was trying to understand how a simple inheritance hearing had transformed into testimony about war crimes and intelligence manipulation. Judge Cole had completely abandoned any pretense of controlling his courtroom and was just sitting there in stunned silence, probably realizing that his comfortable local legal practice was about to be thoroughly investigated by federal authorities looking for additional evidence of corruption and conspiracy. Captain Morrison made careful notes on her secure tablet while I continued providing testimony that would dismantle the entire network of corruption that had gotten my team killed. Lieutenant Commander, What was your team's immediate response upon discovering this intelligence discrepancy? She asked, with professional interest. This was the part that still caused me physical pain, the part I relived during every nightmare for 3 years. I immediately requested clarification from command regarding rules of engagement and civilian protection protocols, specifically asking for guidance on how to proceed when faced with intelligence that was clearly inaccurate. I testified while maintaining direct eye contact with my father. I was ordered by my commanding officer to proceed with the mission as originally planned, to neutralize all targets, regardless of age or apparent civilian status, and to ensure that no witnesses remained who could report American involvement in the operation. The silence in the courtroom was so complete that I could hear the ventilation system cycling and the distant sound of traffic on the naval base outside. Special Agent Martinez leaned forward with the focused attention of someone who had just heard testimony that could result in death penalty charges for multiple defendants. Lieutenant Commander, are you stating under oath that you received explicit orders to eliminate civilian noncombatants, including children? She asked with careful precision, ensuring that my answer would be recorded clearly for federal prosecutors. I noted, while maintaining the steady eye contact that special operations training had taught me to use during high-stress situations. That is correct, ma'am. When I requested confirmation of those orders and emphasized that our targets appeared to be refugees rather than enemy combatants, I was told that intelligence assets had confirmed all individuals in the compound were legitimate military targets who should be treated as enemy combatants according to established rules of engagement. I could see my father's face cycling through various expressions of panic, denial, and calculation as he tried to find some way to minimize his exposure to federal prosecution. The orders came through encrypted communication channels with proper authentication codes, leaving no doubt about their official nature or the consequences of disobedience. Commander Torres asked the question that would destroy everything my father had built since his retirement from active duty and his transition to civilian defense contracting. Lieutenant Commander, can you identify the specific individual who issued those orders to your team? He asked while preparing to record the answer that would likely result in federal arrest warrants being issued within the hour. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The culmination of 3 years of patient investigation and evidence gathering. The moment when I could finally honor the promise I made to my teammates during those final minutes of their lives. The orders were transmitted through Admiral Jonathan Whitfield, who was serving as liaison between CENTCOM Forward Operations and Special Operations Command, I testified, while looking directly at the man who had raised me to believe in honor, duty, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. All communication was properly authenticated and came through official channels, leaving no doubt about the source or authority behind the mission parameters. The words seemed to echo in the absolute silence of the courtroom like gunshots in an empty building. My father's face went through a series of transformations that reminded me of watching controlled demolitions on military bases, everything solid and permanent suddenly collapsing into rubble. He slumped forward in his chair like someone had cut the strings holding him upright, his military bearing completely abandoned as the full implications of my testimony began to sink in. Patricia's mouth fell open as she finally realized that her husband wasn't just facing an embarrassing legal setback or a reduction in his comfortable retirement income. He was facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment or execution for treason and war crimes. The comfortable lifestyle she had planned, built on his pension and defense contractor connections, was evaporating before her eyes as federal investigators began calculating the scope of the criminal enterprise they had been operating for years. Captain Morrison's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see the analytical wheels turning as she processed the implications of what I had just revealed under oath. Lieutenant Commander, do you have documentation supporting this testimony? She asked, while already knowing that someone with my training and experience would never make these kinds of allegations without bulletproof evidence. I reached into my briefcase with deliberate, methodical movements and produced a USB drive sealed in an official evidence bag with multiple authentication seals. I have encrypted communications logs, intelligence reports, after-action summaries, and classified correspondence covering a 3-year period from March 2022 to present, I replied with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 years building an unassailable case. Everything is properly classified according to federal security protocols and requires appropriate security clearances for review by authorized personnel. I handed the USB drive to Captain Morrison like I was transferring control of a nuclear weapon, which, in terms of its potential impact on the defense establishment, wasn't far from the truth. Special Agent Martinez accepted the USB drive like it was radioactive material that could contaminate everything it touched with federal criminal liability. Lieutenant Commander, are you alleging that Admiral Whitfield was involved in a systematic conspiracy to provide false intelligence to special operations teams? She asked with the careful precision of someone building a case that would need to withstand scrutiny from defense attorneys representing high-ranking military officials. I maintained eye contact with my father while answering, watching him realize that his comfortable post-military career was about to be revealed as an elaborate criminal enterprise. I'm alleging that a network of retired and active duty officers has been systematically manipulating intelligence for personal financial gain and political convenience, resulting in unnecessary casualties among special operations personnel deployed in multiple theaters of operation. I replied with the clinical detachment of someone delivering a briefing on enemy capabilities. This conspiracy has been operating for at least 3 years, possibly longer, and has affected dozens of classified operations across Afghanistan, Iraq, and other classified locations. The scope of what I was describing began to sink in for everyone present. This wasn't just about one failed mission or one corrupt officer, but a systematic betrayal that had gotten American soldiers killed for profit. That's when my father finally broke completely, his military composure shattering like armor pierced by armor-penetrating rounds. He stood up shakily and pointed at me with a trembling finger that looked like it belonged to a man twice his age. "You don't know what you're talking about, Yara. Those operations were absolutely necessary for national security. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good of American interests." His voice cracked with the desperation of someone who knew he was drowning but couldn't stop talking. "You've never had to make command decisions that affect thousands of lives. You've never had to balance political realities against tactical idealism." Commander Torres immediately stepped between us with the fluid movement of someone who had intervened in hundreds of similar confrontations. "Admiral Whitfield, you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to exercise that right immediately," he said with the calm authority of someone who understood that anything my father said would be used against him in federal court. "Anything you say from this point forward will be recorded and can be used as evidence in criminal proceedings against you." But Patricia wasn't finished with her desperate attempt to control a narrative that had already spiraled completely beyond her ability to manipulate or contain. She jumped up from her chair and pointed at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes, like she wanted to physically attack me in front of federal authorities. "This is absolutely insane. She's making all of this up to avoid losing her inheritance. She's a mentally disturbed veteran who can't accept responsibility for her own command failures." Her voice rose to nearly a scream as her carefully maintained facade finally cracked under pressure. "She's been planning this elaborate revenge fantasy for months, manipulating everyone in this room to get back at us for her mother's death." Special Agent Martinez turned toward her with the kind of calm, professional authority that had ended thousands of similar outbursts during federal investigations. "Mrs. Whitfield, obstruction of a federal investigation is a felony punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison," she said with terrifying calm. "I strongly recommend that you remain seated and consult with an attorney before making any additional statements that could be used against you in criminal proceedings." Judge Cole finally found his voice, though it emerged as a confused whisper rather than the authoritative judicial tone he had maintained throughout the morning proceedings. I think this court is no longer the appropriate venue for these proceedings," he said while looking around his courtroom like he no longer recognized it. "This appears to have moved far beyond civil inheritance matters into federal criminal territory that exceeds my jurisdiction and expertise." Captain Morrison nodded with the patient professionalism of someone who had taken control of similar situations dozens of times throughout her career in naval intelligence. Your Honor, will be assuming federal jurisdiction over all matters related to classified information, national security concerns, and potential violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, she announced while already preparing to transfer the entire proceeding to federal facilities. The civil inheritance proceeding can be suspended indefinitely pending resolution of the federal investigation, which will likely take several months to complete. The casual way she mentioned several months made it clear that this investigation was going to destroy everyone involved and reshape the entire defense contracting industry. I remained standing at perfect military attention while watching everything I had worked toward for 3 years finally coming together with the precision of a successful special operations mission. My father's network of corrupt officials was exposed and facing federal prosecution. The intelligence manipulation that had killed my team was going to be investigated by people with the authority and resources to hold everyone accountable. The inheritance dispute that had brought us all to this courtroom was suddenly completely irrelevant compared to the federal charges that were about to destroy everyone who had participated in betraying American soldiers for personal profit. Patricia's comfortable lifestyle, built on blood money from defense contracts and intelligence manipulation, was evaporating before her eyes as federal investigators began calculating the scope of the criminal enterprise. Judge Cole's comfortable local legal practice was about to be thoroughly investigated for corruption and conspiracy, since federal authorities would want to know how many other cases had been fixed through my father's political connections. Lieutenant Commander Chen finally spoke up, though her voice was barely above a whisper as she tried to understand her role in what had become a national security investigation. "Captain Morrison, what happens to my client now?" she asked, with the uncertainty of someone who realized her JAG training hadn't prepared her for this level of federal complexity. Captain Morrison looked at me with something that might have been professional respect, mixed with recognition of what I had accomplished. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield will be debriefed by appropriate federal authorities and may be asked to provide additional testimony as the investigation expands, she replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who understood that my cooperation was voluntary, but essential. Her service record indicates she has acted with honor and integrity throughout this matter, and federal authorities will ensure she receives appropriate protection during the investigation and prosecution phases. The phrase appropriate protection suggested that federal investigators understood the scope of the conspiracy I was exposing and the potential danger I faced from other participants who hadn't been identified yet. Patricia made one final desperate attempt to salvage some control over a situation that had already destroyed everything she had worked to build since marrying my father. "This whole thing is a setup. She planned this entire scenario. She manipulated everyone to get revenge for her mother's death," she screamed with the hysteria of someone watching her entire world collapse in real time. "She's been plotting this for years, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy us." That's when I finally allowed myself a small, satisfied smile, the first genuine emotion I had shown during the entire proceeding. She was absolutely right about one thing. I had planned this with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized the best special operations missions. But she was completely wrong about everything else, and her admission that this felt like a setup was about to provide federal prosecutors with additional evidence of consciousness of guilt. Special Agent Martinez closed her notepad with the finality of someone wrapping up the initial phase of what would become a massive federal investigation spanning multiple agencies and jurisdictions. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are correct that this was carefully planned," she said with the calm confidence of someone who had been building this case for much longer than anyone in the room realized. "What you apparently don't understand is that your husband has been under federal surveillance for 18 months as part of a broader investigation into defense contractor fraud and intelligence manipulation." She paused to let this information sink in before delivering the final blow. This inheritance hearing was monitored specifically to provide him with an opportunity to incriminate himself in a controlled environment, which he has done thoroughly and repeatedly. The revelation that federal authorities had been investigating my father for over a year meant that everything we had said and done during the past months had been carefully documented and recorded by people with the authority to use it in federal court. My father's face went from gray to a sickly green color as he realized he had walked directly into a trap that had been set long before this inheritance hearing was ever scheduled, a trap that had been baited with his own greed and arrogance. He had been so confident in his ability to manipulate the legal system and intimidate me into silence that he had never considered the possibility that federal authorities were already investigating his post-military activities. Patricia looked around the courtroom like she was searching for an exit that would never exist, her comfortable future disappearing as federal investigators began calculating the scope of the money laundering and conspiracy charges she would face. Judge Call was frantically shuffling papers like he could somehow undo the past hour and return to the simple inheritance dispute he thought he was hearing. But it was too late for anyone to escape the consequences of what had been revealed under oath. Commander Torres approached me with what looked like official military orders, his expression suggesting what the next phase of this operation was about to begin. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield, given your cooperation with this federal investigation and your specialized knowledge of the compromised operations, you are being offered a temporary assignment to assist with ongoing security assessments, he announced while handing me a folder marked with classification stamps I hadn't seen since my last deployment to Afghanistan. This assignment is completely voluntary, but Command believes your expertise would be invaluable in preventing similar intelligence compromises in the future. I opened the folder carefully and read the assignment designation that represented everything I had been hoping for. Echo Vigil, Special Operations Security Review. It was exactly what my dead teammates deserved, exactly what I had promised them during those final moments under fire, a chance to hunt down every corrupt official who had treated special operations teams like expendable assets in their personal profit schemes. The Echo Vigil assignment represented much more than just another military posting. It was an opportunity to systematically investigate and neutralize the network of corruption that had been sacrificing American soldiers for political convenience and financial gain. The unit would have access to classified databases, federal investigative resources, and the authority to recommend prosecutions for military and civilian officials who had betrayed their oaths of service. Most importantly, it would have the mission to implement security protocols that would prevent future special operations teams from being betrayed by the people they trusted most. I looked at the assignment orders with the same careful attention I had given to mission briefings before high-risk operations, understanding that this represented a chance to honor my fallen teammates while protecting future generations of special operations personnel from similar betrayals. Captain Morrison packed up her secure tablet and prepared to transfer operations to federal facilities where the real investigation could begin without the constraints of civilian legal procedures. Admiral Whitfield, Special Agent Martinez will escort you to federal facilities for comprehensive debriefing and formal charging procedures, she announced with the clinical efficiency of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar arrests. Mrs. Whitfield, you will need to remain available for additional interviews regarding financial records and potential conspiracy charges. She turned toward Judge Cole with something between professional courtesy and barely concealed contempt. Your Honor, we will need complete copies of all court records related to this proceeding, including any sealed or confidential materials that may be relevant to our investigation. The casual way she mentioned formal charging procedures made it clear that my father's arrest had been predetermined, and this hearing had simply been an opportunity to gather additional evidence for federal prosecutors. As federal agents prepared to escort my father out of the courtroom in restraints, he looked at me one final time with a mixture of pride, disappointment, and recognition that I had outmaneuvered him using skills he had taught me. Yara, you don't understand the complete picture, he said with the exhausted voice of someone who knew his war was over. Those operations saved more lives than they cost. Sometimes good people have to make terrible choices to protect national interests. I met his eyes with the same steady gaze I had learned during 12 years of military service, the same unwavering focus I had maintained during the worst moments of combat. "No, Dad," I replied with quiet finality. "Good people find ways to complete the mission without sacrificing their honor or the lives of innocent people." It was the last conversation we would ever have as father and daughter. From this point forward, he would be a federal defendant, and I would be a witness for the prosecution. Patricia attempted to follow the federal agents, probably hoping to limit the damage to her comfortable lifestyle and her children's future, but Special Agent Martinez stopped her at the courtroom door with professional authority. "Mrs. Whitfield, you will be contacted separately regarding financial records, property transfers, and potential conspiracy charges," she said while blocking Patricia's exit. "I strongly recommend that you retain qualified legal counsel before any additional interviews." The look of absolute panic on Patricia's face suggested she understood exactly what financial records federal investigators would be examining, and that her lavish lifestyle had been built on proceeds from criminal activities that would result in asset forfeiture and federal charges. Her dreams of inheriting my mother's estate and securing her family's financial future had been replaced by the nightmare of defending against money laundering charges that could result in decades in federal prison. Lieutenant Commander Chen approached me as the courtroom cleared of federal authorities, and her role in this proceeding came to an abrupt end. "Yara, I have to ask, how long have you been planning this entire operation?" she said with the professional curiosity of someone who had just witnessed a masterclass in legal strategy and tactical patience. I closed the Echo Vigil assignment folder and secured it in my briefcase with the same care I would use for classified mission orders. "Since the day I realized that fighting for justice sometimes requires the patience to let your enemies destroy themselves," I replied while maintaining the military bearing that had carried me through 12 years of service. "Since the day I understood that the best revenge is giving corrupt people enough rope to hang themselves in front of federal investigators." The systematic way I had documented everything, gathered evidence, and waited for the perfect moment to deploy Shadow Vesper had been a 3-year special operation designed to honor fallen teammates and protect future soldiers from similar betrayals. As I walked out of the courtroom at Naval Station Norfolk, I thought about the promise I had made to my 8 teammates during those final moments under fire in Afghanistan, when they were dying because someone had deliberately provided false intelligence to get them killed. I had sworn that their deaths wouldn't be meaningless, that someone would be held accountable for the intelligence failures that put them in harm's way, and that future special operations teams would be protected from similar betrayals. Today, that promise was finally being kept through federal prosecutions that would destroy the entire network of corruption and send a clear message that betraying American soldiers would result in life imprisonment or execution for treason. The inheritance dispute that had started this whole process suddenly seemed trivial compared to the justice that was finally being served to people who had traded American lives for personal profit. The inheritance dispute that had brought my father and Patricia to federal attention was resolved 6 months later in my favor, but by then it was completely irrelevant to everything that mattered. My mother's $2.3 million estate, her beachfront property in Virginia Beach, and the trust fund she had established for wounded veterans were donated to create the Silverfish Foundation, providing comprehensive support for families of special operations personnel killed in intelligence-related incidents. The foundation would ensure that other families never had to fight for recognition that their loved ones had died because of systematic betrayals rather than combat failures. The house in Virginia Beach was converted into a transitional facility for veterans dealing with command betrayal and institutional corruption, providing them with resources to report misconduct without fear of retaliation or career destruction. Echo Vigil operated for 18 months as a permanent security review unit within Naval Special Operations Command, systematically investigating and documenting corruption that had affected dozens of classified operations across multiple theaters. We identified 43 current and former military officials involved in intelligence manipulation, defense contractor fraud, and systematic betrayal of special operations personnel. Our investigations resulted in 67 federal convictions, including death sentences for 3 retired general officers who had sold operational intelligence to foreign governments. Most importantly, we implemented comprehensive security protocols that would prevent future special operations teams from being sacrificed for political convenience or personal financial gain. The unit's work ensured that the kind of systematic betrayal that killed my team would never again be possible within the American military structure. My father was convicted on 28 federal charges, including treason, conspiracy to commit war crimes, obstruction of justice, and multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, after a trial that revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise. He received life imprisonment without possibility of parole, and his military pension was revoked, along with all honors and decorations he had received during 30 years of active duty service. Judge Harrison Cole lost his military commission and received 15 years in federal prison for judicial corruption and conspiracy to obstruct federal investigations. Patricia was convicted of money laundering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, receiving 12 years in federal prison and complete forfeiture of all assets acquired through the criminal enterprise. The comfortable lifestyle she had planned was replaced by a federal prison cell, and the knowledge that her children would grow up knowing their stepfather had betrayed American soldiers for money. The Shadow Vesper files led to the largest investigation of military contractor fraud in American history, resulting in the dissolution of 17 defense companies and the recovery of over $800 million in fraudulent contracts and stolen government funds. The investigation revealed that intelligence manipulation had affected over 200 classified operations across 15 years, resulting in unnecessary casualties that could have been prevented if operational security had been maintained. Congressional hearings led to comprehensive reforms in defense contracting, intelligence oversight, and protection for military whistleblowers who report systematic corruption within the chain of command. The reforms ensured that future investigations of military misconduct would be conducted by independent federal authorities rather than internal military review boards that could be compromised by the same corruption they were supposed to investigate. Echo Vigil continues to operate as a permanent oversight unit within the Department of Defense, ensuring that special operations personnel have independent protection against command abuse, intelligence manipulation, and institutional betrayal. We maintain comprehensive databases of classified operations, provide secure reporting channels for personnel who witness misconduct, and conduct regular security assessments to identify potential vulnerabilities before they can be exploited by corrupt officials. The unit serves as a permanent reminder that honor, duty, and integrity are not just military slogans, but enforceable standards that will be protected through federal prosecution of anyone who violates them. Most importantly, we ensure that the sacrifice of American soldiers will never again be treated as an acceptable cost of doing business by officials who have forgotten what military service really means. My name is Yara Whitfield, and I kept my promise to the dead by ensuring that their betrayal was avenged through systematic justice rather than personal revenge. The inheritance hearing that exposed my father's criminal enterprise was just the beginning of a comprehensive campaign to protect American soldiers from the corruption that had been treating them as expendable assets for political and financial gain. You tell me, if your own family had betrayed everything you fought for, would you have had the patience to build a federal case instead of taking personal revenge? Have you ever had to choose between personal loyalty and professional honor when someone you trusted violated everything they taught you to believe? Drop your stories in the comments. I read every single one and understand exactly what it means to serve something bigger than yourself, even when the people closest to you have forgotten what service really requires.